Picture the most powerful empire on earth. 40 countries, 150 million people, a navy that rules every ocean on the planet, a capital city that produces more wealth in a single morning than most kingdoms see in a decade. Now put it all in the hands of an 18-year-old girl who was woken up 50 minutes ago and is still wearing her nightgown. That's England. June the 20th, 1837. The moment an era is born, not with a battle, not with a treaty, not with any grand plan, but with two old men standing at the foot of a bed in Kensington Palace at 6 in the morning, their hats in their hands, their knees creaking as they lower themselves to the floor, and a girl with her hair loose down her back who doesn't fully understand yet that the world she woke up in and the world she's about to enter are separated by exactly one sentence. We're going back there tonight, not to the palace, not to the throne room, not to any of the places the paintings show. We're going to the street, the London street. On the morning everything changed. One city, 1 week, one person, you, arriving in the middle of all of it, from a village in Yorkshire that doesn't even have a name most people have heard of, carrying everything you own in a canvas bag that weighs about as much as your own tired arms. So I make these history stories, and honestly, I don't know if you're trying to sleep or if you're just a person who finds something deeply comforting about hearing that even the most important moments in history happen to confused, underdressed, exhausted people who had no idea what was coming. Either way, get comfortable, pull the blanket up, here we go. Your eyes open to a sound you don't recognize. For a full 3 seconds, you lie there in the dark and try to locate yourself. The smell hits first, always the smell, and it is wrong in every possible way. Not the cold grass smell of morning at home, not the animal warmth of the farmyard. This smell is coal smoke and horse dung and river mud, and something underneath both of those that you will later learn to identify as the collective exhalation of 2 million human beings living too close together. It coats the back of your throat. You swallow. It doesn't go away. This sound is the problem. That's what woke you. Shouting. Not one person shouting. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Somewhere outside, beneath you, above you, it's impossible to tell. London has a way of carrying sound through walls and floors and upstairs so that you can't find where it's coming from, only that it's everywhere. You sit up. The room is barely a room. It's a cupboard off a corridor in the upper servants' quarters of Lord Ashworth's house on Grosvenor Square, Mayfair, London. You have been in this city for exactly 2 days. You arrived on the coach from Leeds on the 18th of June, 1837, carrying a canvas bag containing 2 shirts, 1 pair of stockings with a hole in the left heel, a letter of introduction written by the vicar of your home parish, a hard piece of cheese your mother wrapped in cloth, and approximately 6 shillings in mixed coin, which you have already established is not nearly enough money to survive in London for any meaningful period of time. You're 15 years old. Your name is Thomas Hewitt. And you have no idea what is happening outside. The bed is a narrow iron thing with a straw-stuffed mattress that pokes you in the spine at irregular intervals. You've shared it for 2 nights with a boy named Peter who does something with the coal and the grates, and who told you on your first night that London would eat you alive if you let it. He said it cheerfully, like he was giving you a gift. You didn't sleep much after that. Peter is already gone. His side of the mattress is cold. The shouting gets louder. You swing your legs out of bed. The floor is bare boards, cold enough to make your feet curl. You find your breeches on the hook beside the door. Your one set of livery is hung separately. You learned that lesson already. Mr. Graves made that very clear. And you pull them on in the dark, your fingers fumbling with the buttons. Mr. Graves is the butler. He is a tall, narrow man who moves through the house like something that was installed there at the same time as the walls. His face, when he speaks to you, has the expression of a man who has lowered his expectations so many times he's lost count. He has not yet said your name without a pause before it that communicates volumes. Thomas, as if the name itself is a problem he's still working through. You find your shirt, find your shoes, decide the waistcoat can wait. The corridor outside your door is already busy. Two of the housemaids are moving fast toward the back stairs, their caps unpinned, their faces doing something complicated that you can't quite read. Cook, a massive woman named Mrs. Fry, who you have not yet spoken to directly because she seems to exist at a level above conversation, is standing at the end of the corridor holding a candle and a ladle and looking toward the window as if expecting it to explain itself. "What is it?" you ask. Your voice comes out too young. It always does. "The king's dead," says Mrs. Fry. She says it flatly, the way you might announce that it's raining. William IV, King of England, Emperor of what feels like half the world, dead at 2 o'clock in the morning at Windsor Castle, 60 miles from where you're standing right now. You stand there for a moment in the corridor, still buttoning your shirt, and try to understand what that means. It means, as you will learn over the next several hours, that the shouting in the streets is London processing information. A city of 2 million people receiving news the way a body receives shock. First, the men who carry the messages, riders from Windsor, breathless and dust-covered. Then the bells. First one church, then 3, then a dozen. Then every church in London finding the news and ringing it out into the dark. By the time you make it downstairs to the servants' hall, you understand one thing with absolute clarity. The world you woke up in yesterday and the world you're entering now are not the same world at all. And the girl who is now, as of this morning, Queen of England, is 18 years old, 5 feet and 1 inch tall, was found sleeping alone in a room at Kensington Palace with her spaniel on the bed, and was informed of her new position by the Lord Chamberlain and the Archbishop of Canterbury, while still wearing her nightgown with her hair down, her eyes full of sleep. She did not ask for any of this. Neither, frankly, did you. This is the Victorian Era, and it starts right now, before the grand speeches, before the portraits in oils, before the enormous black carriages and the mourning etiquette, and the empire that will cover more of the earth's surface than any empire in history. It starts in a corridor in Kensington Palace at 6 in the morning. It starts in a servants' hall in Mayfair, where a 15-year-old boy from Yorkshire is trying to understand what the word queen means when applied to someone who was a girl 3 hours ago. The servants' hall is in the basement. You find it by following the sound and the smell. Sound, voices, the scrape of chairs, the metallic clatter of someone making tea faster than usual. Smell, coal fire, bread from somewhere, and the particular sharp quality of anxious human beings gathered in a closed room at 6 in the morning. 11 people around the table, plus Mrs. Fry at the range, plus Mr. Graves standing in the doorway to the corridor, not sitting, which tells you something. Mr. Graves sitting would mean the situation was under control. Mr. Graves standing means it hasn't been classified yet. You take a place at the end of the bench, next to a kitchen maid whose name you haven't learned yet. She smells of soap and flour, and she's staring at the table. James is there, James Lockwood, the first footman. He's 22, born in Bethnal Green, tall enough to look good in full livery, and sharp enough to know when to use that to his advantage. He's been explaining things to you in the evenings when Mr. Graves isn't watching. Not out of pure kindness, James does nothing purely, but because you haven't made any serious mistakes yet, and he's decided you might turn out to be useful. The Archbishop went to Kensington at 5, James says, wrapping his hands round a mug of tea. Lord Conyngham with him. They woke her up, told her. How do you know that? Someone asks. Because a rider from Kensington came through half an hour ago, and the rider told the stable boy, who told Tommy, who works the night coals, who came through here about 20 minutes before you lot stirred yourselves. Information in London, you're already beginning to understand, moves the way water moves, finding every crack, pooling in unexpected places, never stopping. So she's queen then, says Peter, who's sitting across from you with coal dust still on his hands, despite apparently having been awake for some time. Queen Victoria, just like that, just like that. The name sits in the room for a moment. Victoria. It was a name almost nobody knew 6 years ago. It's the name of an 18-year-old girl who has, in the last few hours, become the answer to every question about what happens next. What happens next is this. The country changes its name. Not officially, not in any document, not yet, but in the way it thinks of itself. The way every era that follows a king eventually has to decide what it's going to be called. The previous decades had a name already. The Regency, named for the Prince Regent, the fat, spendthrift, brilliant, scandalous future George IV, who ruled in his mad father's place. The Regency era, you might have heard of it. All those novels your sister read, the country houses, the drawing rooms, the balls and the satire and the elegant cruelty of people who had money and time, and nothing better to do with either than devise increasingly precise ways to make each other miserable. That's done now. The Regency gave way to William IV, who was called the Sailor King because he'd spent time in the Navy, and was roughly as subtle about it as that nickname suggests. He wasn't a bad king, he wasn't a great one. He lasted 7 years. And now there is Victoria. And the era that will follow will take her name. It will be called the Victorian Era, and it will last 63 years, which is longer than any British monarch before or since. It will span the transformation of a largely agricultural country into the industrial heart of the world. It will see the invention of the railway, the telegraph, the photograph, the telephone, the motor car. It will see the British Empire expand until it covers 1/4 of the land surface of the earth. It will see the Great Exhibition and the Irish Famine and Jack the Ripper and Charles Dickens and Florence Nightingale and Charles Darwin, suggesting politely and with extensive evidence that God might not have made everything in a week. All of that is coming. 63 years of it. But right now, at 6:30 in the morning on the 20th of June, 1837, the era hasn't started yet. Not properly. There is only the shouting in the streets, the bells in the churches, the servants around a table in a basement in Mayfair, doing what people have always done when the ground shifts under their feet, making tea and trying to figure out what happens next. Mr. Graves speaks. He doesn't raise his voice. He never raises his voice. He simply speaks and the room quiets around it, the way water quiets around a stone. His lordship will be receiving callers today. The house will be in full order by 8 o'clock. Morning dress. A pause. All of you. He looks at you specifically. His gaze stays on you for slightly longer than anyone else, communicating without a single word that you should know what morning dress is, should have it ready, and should not require him to explain this to you. You have no idea what mourning dress is. You look at James. James's face doesn't move, but his eyes flick slightly right, which you have learned means, talk to me later. Mr. Graves turns and walks back down the corridor. His footsteps are perfectly even. He doesn't rush. The room exhales. Mourning dress, you say to James quietly, once Mr. Graves is out of earshot. Black armband. That's all you'll need for now. James picks up his tea again. We'll get you one from the linen press, don't worry. What does it mean? For the house? James considers the question. For the house? Black ribbons on the door. Lord Ashworth won't attend his club for at least a week. Lady Ashworth won't receive. The meals get simpler. Well, relatively. He pauses. For the city? Everything closes for 3 days. All the theatres, the pleasure gardens. He looks at his tea. For the country? He doesn't finish the sentence for a moment. Outside, through the narrow high windows of the basement, you can hear London. Still the bells, still the shouting, but changing in quality now. Becoming something less raw, something more settled. A city beginning to absorb what has happened. Everything changes, James says finally. That's what it means, and usually not in ways you can predict. Last time a monarch died, we had 4 kings in 11 years. The time before that, everything they thought was permanent turned out not to be permanent at all. He puts down the mug. New queen, new rules, new faces. Whatever the old lot thought they were owed, they might want to start checking. He looks at you. That's what it means. You sit with that for a moment. The armband, the black ribbons, the new queen in her nightgown in Kensington Palace. Everything changes. Your first errand of the morning is to the chandler's shop on Davy Street to collect the black ribbon that's already been ordered. Apparently, because Mr. Graves, whatever else you might say about him, does not wait for events to overtake him. The street outside hits you with the full force of London morning. You have been in London 2 days and you're still not used to it. You come from a village. You come from a place where the loudest sound at dawn is the mill wheel and the occasional argument between neighbours, and where the smell in the morning is wet earth and coal smoke and the clean green smell of fields that are just fields. London is not that. London is Grosvenor Square opening out ahead of you with its garden in the centre and its grand terraced houses on 4 sides. The windows already catching the June light, the ironwork black and precise, the pavements already busy with other servants doing other errands, and beyond that, Mayfair spreading in every direction with its straight streets and its careful geography of wealth. And above all of it, visible even from here if you turn the right way, the city beyond Mayfair, the real London. The London that is not careful and does not smell like beeswax polish. The air smells of coal and manure and bread and the distant mud smell of the Thames, which is only a 15-minute walk to the south and which you can smell on certain mornings without walking anywhere at all. But today there is something else in it. The city has a different quality. You felt it even crossing the square. People moving differently, stopping to talk to strangers in the street, which apparently is not something that normally happens. 2 men arguing outside a bootmaker's, loudly and with arm gestures, but about the king, not about each other. A woman standing at the window of a shop, hands folded, watching the street. The news is moving. You can feel it moving. Davy Street is 4 minutes away, and by the time you've walked it, you've heard the word Victoria spoken out loud by strangers in the street 11 times. You count. The chandler's shop smells of wax and rendered fat and something herbal underneath. Lavender, maybe, from the beeswax candles stacked in rows beside the door. The man behind the counter already has his own black armband on. He hands you the ribbon without your having to explain what it's for. Half the city is doing the same thing this morning. You ask him, because you're 15 and you haven't learned yet when not to ask questions. What was it like? The last time? When William became king? The man is perhaps 60. He has the slow, deliberate movements of someone who has spent decades handling fragile things. He considers you for a moment. 7 years ago, he says, I stood in the street outside St. James's and watched the proclamation. George IV died, and William was proclaimed. And we all stood there and thought, new king, new beginning, perhaps things will be different. Were they? He ties the ribbon into a careful bundle. His fingers are practiced and quick. Different from what it might have been, maybe. Not different from what it was. He hands you the bundle. This one's a girl, 18 years old, never been out of the country, never been allowed to be alone with anyone except her mother and her mother's keeper. He shakes his head. God knows what she makes of all this. God knows what she makes of all this. You carry the ribbon back through Mayfair with that in your head. What does she make of all this? Victoria, an 18-year-old girl who's been kept so carefully sheltered, so deliberately isolated, that there are people in London society who have never seen her in person. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, a German woman who came to England as a widow and never quite understood where she'd ended up. And a man named Sir John Conroy who runs the household with a precision that people who aren't kind call a system, and people who are honest call a prison. The Kensington system, that's what it's called. The rules that governed Victoria's childhood. She was never to be alone, never to descend a staircase without someone holding her hand, never to speak to strangers without a chaperone, never to meet members of court without supervision, never to have a friend her own age without that friendship being monitored. She was raised to be a queen, or she was raised to be controllable. The people who designed the system would tell you those are the same thing. You think about that as you walk back. You're 15, and you came here with 6 shillings and a canvas bag, and you're the freest person in this story. You think about that for a long time. Back in the house, the day begins in earnest. Morning dress, a black armband, placed on your left sleeve, an inch below the shoulder. James ties it for you in the corridor outside the footman's room, his fingers quick and precise. His hands are remarkable things, large, steady, doing everything with a minimum of motion. You've noticed that about the best servants. The economy of movement, everything done once and correctly. Tie it tighter, he says. It slides down. You don't want it found around your elbow when his lordship is receiving. You tie it tighter. The morning is busy in a way that has nothing to do with the actual requirements of the house, and everything to do with the anxiety of people who work in a place where the rules have just changed, and nobody's quite sure what the new rules are yet. There's a compulsion, you notice, to be visibly busy, to carry things from one room to another, to polish things that are already polished. Mr. Graves cuts through all of it by being exactly the same as always. He does not run. He does not speak faster than usual. He does not appear to feel anything about the death of a king, which is not because he doesn't feel it. You'll understand this later. But because Mr. Graves has been in service since he was 12 years old, and he long ago reached the conclusion that the house comes first, and the house requires order, and order requires precisely the same behaviour in exceptional circumstances as in ordinary ones, because the moment you start making exceptions is the moment the exceptions multiply. You carry things, you run errands, you stand where you're told to stand. You fetch a glass of water for Lady Ashworth's companion, a thin woman named Miss Holt who has been staying in the yellow bedroom for a week, and who has the particular drawn look of a person who has been quietly afraid of something for a long time. At 10 o'clock, Lord Ashworth comes downstairs. You've seen him before. He's a tall man, 52, with side whiskers that are more grey than brown, and a face that carries its authority loosely, the way men do when they've had it so long they've stopped noticing it. He's not an unkind man. He's simply a man from a world where you do not exist in any particularly meaningful sense. He walks through the hall taking his hat from James without looking and goes out. He'll be going to his club, or to the palace, or to one of the dozen places that men like him go when the world shifts, to find out what they're supposed to think and who they're supposed to be now. James closes the front door behind him. Now, James says, turning back to you as we breathe. You breathe. The day stretches out. At midday, Mr. Graves tells you, in the particular way that Mr. Graves tells you things, which is to say he addresses the air about 3 inches to your left, that you have an hour after the luncheon clearing before your afternoon duties begin. He says this once. He does not repeat it. You take the hour. Outside, Mayfair is still doing its strange morning thing, still processing the news, still rearranging itself round a new reality. But as you walk south along Park Lane, past the western edge of Hyde Park, the trees thick and green in the June heat, the grass dotted with people who aren't servants taking air who don't usually take air on a Tuesday, you start to feel London opening up around you. You go toward the palace. You go toward Buckingham Palace because everyone is going toward Buckingham Palace. Not in a crowd, not as a mob, but as individuals all choosing the same direction at the same time, the way iron filings orient themselves toward a magnet. Through Green Park, past the plane trees with their mottled bark, past the paths where the deer sometimes wander in from the park and look at the humans with a calm, absolute lack of concern. The palace is visible from the end of the park, and when I say the palace, I need you to understand that it doesn't look yet the way you'll have seen it on postcards and in photographs. The famous front, the east wing, the balcony, the central arch, hasn't been built yet. In 1837, Buckingham Palace is still in the middle of being renovated. It's a building site wearing the clothes of a palace, scaffolding on parts of it, stone dust, the smell of lime and cut marble on the June air. But it's there, and outside it people have gathered. Not thousands yet, that will come, but hundreds, standing in small groups on the gravel and the grass looking at the gates, not angry, not celebrating, just looking. As if looking at the building that contains the new queen will tell them something about what it means that she exists. You stand among them for a while. She's in there, probably. Victoria, 18 years old, probably not sleeping anymore. Probably, and this part nobody outside will find out until her journals are made public much later, probably sitting at her desk writing. She's a writer, Victoria. She's kept a journal since she was 13, and on this morning she will write about being woken, about being told, about dropping to her knees and asking the men who came what she could do for them, because she had been trained to defer to everyone around her for her entire life, and it took a moment, just a moment, before she understood that the correct response to being told, "You are queen," is not to ask what you can do for anyone. She wrote in her journal, "I am very young, and perhaps in many, though not in all things, inexperienced. but I am sure that very few have more real goodwill and more real desire to do what is fit and right than I have. You don't know that yet. You won't know it for decades. The journals won't be published until after she's dead. But standing outside those gates in June 1837, looking up at a building still half under construction, you feel something, some sense of the country deciding something, making a choice, not consciously, not in any meeting or parliament, but in the way a river changes direction, slowly, collectively, all at once. Something is beginning. You walk back through Green Park with the smell of cut grass around you and the June warmth on your face, and you try to organise your thoughts about what you've seen. A country that has been through the Napoleonic Wars, a country that has been through the madness of George III and the scandal of George IV and the muddle of William, a country that has the largest navy on earth and the most powerful financial system on earth, and also, and this is the thing that nobody says in polite company in Mayfair, but that you, having come from the north of England, know with the certainty of someone who has seen it, also some of the most wretched living conditions in the world. Children working in mills at the age of 5, factories that run 24 hours and consume human bodies the way coal consumption consumes coal, streets in Manchester and Leeds and Birmingham that make the worst parts of London look prosperous. The era that's beginning is going to have to figure out how to be all of those things at once, and it will, in its way, messily and incompletely and often cruelly, but it will try. The Victorian era will try harder to improve itself than any era before it, because it will have the technology to see itself clearly, the newspapers, the photographs, the statistics. And once you can see a thing clearly, it becomes harder to pretend it isn't there. This is the beginning of that. You're back at the house by 1:30. Mr. Graves is in the hall. His eyes move to your face, then to your armband, then back to your face. You've walked correctly. Your dress is acceptable. Your armband is still in the right position. He says nothing. You take your post. The afternoon passes. It passes in the particular way that afternoons in houses like this one pass, through an accumulation of small tasks, each one purposeful in itself, none of them individually meaningful. You carry messages. You fetch things. You stand in the corridor outside the dining room while Lady Ashworth and Miss Holt have a conversation that lasts 40 minutes and involves the words "quite extraordinary" and "how dreadful," and "she seems so very young," about 40 times each. You learn things by standing still and being invisible. This is one of the great skills of service that nobody tells you about before you arrive. The ability to be present without being noticed, to listen without appearing to listen, to absorb information while remaining, to all external observation, as interesting as a piece of furniture. What you absorb in the course of the afternoon is this: the court will go into mourning for 2 months, full mourning for the first month, all black, all the time, no public entertainments, no dancing, no theatre. Half mourning for the second month, which allows for grey and lavender. This is a disaster for the dressmakers, who have to produce mourning wardrobes in a matter of days for every lady who can afford one, and a windfall for the black crepe sellers, who are currently selling out of stock across the city. Victoria will be officially proclaimed Queen at St. James's Palace. There will be a Privy Council meeting, her first, at which she will meet the men who actually run the country, the ministers and advisers and officials who've been running it while William was dying and who have, in many cases, strong opinions about how it should continue to be run. She will walk into that room alone. No mother, no Conroy. Alone, for the first time in her life. The Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, is 68 years old, experienced, politically damaged in several directions at once, and apparently, this is gossip from Miss Holt, relayed to Lady Ashworth, absorbed by you from the corridor, apparently rather taken with the new Queen. Not in any improper sense. In the way that old men who have spent their lives around the powerful are sometimes taken by young people who have genuine authority in them but haven't yet learned to perform it. She didn't perform it. In the Privy Council meeting, by all accounts, and accounts are everywhere this day, they're being shared the way rumours always are through every level of every house in the city. She was composed. She spoke clearly. She was not frightened, or she didn't show it, which is a different thing, and in some ways more impressive. She read the declaration herself, aloud, to 50 men who had expected most of them to have to guide her through it. She didn't need guiding. That detail catches you standing in the corridor with your hands behind your back and your face toward the middle distance. That detail, the girl in the nightgown becoming the queen in the council chamber inside of a few hours without anyone helping her across the gap, catches you and stays with you. You're beginning to understand something about the Victorian era before it's even properly started. It's an era that's going to have enormous opinions about what a woman can and cannot do. An era that will restrict women in ways that make the Regency look positively enlightened. An era that will insist that women are too delicate for education, too emotional for medicine, too irrational for the vote, too fragile for the streets at night. And the whole time it will be ruled by a woman. The contradiction will never fully resolve itself. The Victorians will just live in it, the way people live in most contradictions, by not looking at them directly. You look at your hands. Your hands are raw from cold water and scrubbing. You've been in service 2 days and already the skin on your knuckles has taken on the particular dry hardness of hands that are washed many times per day with cold water and coarse soap. In a year, if you're still doing this, your hands will look like your grandfather's hands, roughened and split at the knuckles in winter, never quite smooth. You're 15. Your hands should not look like this for another 30 years. This is also the Victorian era. James finds you in the corridor after tea. He has 2 hours, he tells you. Lord Ashworth is dining at his club tonight. There's no formal dinner service, and he's going out. He gives you the look that means you're invited. You go. The city at evening. London in June of 1837 at 7 o'clock in the evening has the quality of a held breath. The light is still good, long June light, golden and level, hitting the tops of the buildings and leaving the streets in warm shadow. The church bells have settled into a lower frequency of tolling, not the urgent ringing of the morning, but the measured regular beat of mourning. One church reinforcing another across the whole city. James walks quickly and you match his pace. He's taller than you by 4 inches and moves like someone who knows exactly where everything is. Every corner, every shortcut, every alley that's quicker than the street. Where are we going, you ask? You'll see. You walk south, past the fine terraces of Belgravia, still smelling of new mortar. Belgravia is being built even as you walk through it. Another grand residential district for the rich. The street still pristine, the houses freshly stuccoed white. The smell of lime and new paint. Workers packing up for the evening, their tools clanging on scaffolding. And then south of that, across the river on Vauxhall Bridge, the smell of the Thames hitting you like a physical thing, cold and green and rotten and vital all at once. the water dark below you with the evening light on it, the boats moving in both directions with the practised ease of things that have been moving on this river since before anyone built any city at its edge. South of the river is a different country. It was always a different country. South of the Thames, beyond the jurisdiction of the City of London, outside the control of the guilds and the courts and the respectable structures that keep the North Bank relatively orderly. This is Southwark, Lambeth, Bermondsey. This is where the things go that don't fit comfortably on the North Bank. The tanneries. You smell them before you see them. Bermondsey, ahead of you, is where London's leather comes from, has been for centuries. And the process by which leather is made from animal hides involves a sequence of steps so deeply unpleasant that if you described them at a dinner table anywhere in Mayfair, you would not be invited back. The hides come in, they are scraped. They are soaked in pits of lime to remove the hair. They are then transferred to pits of tanning liquor, a fluid made from oak bark and water, dark brown, cold, smelling like the inside of a barrel that's been left in the ground for a year. And they sit there for months, sometimes longer. The smell has a physical quality. It has weight. It sits on your chest and in the back of your sinuses, and you can feel it on your skin even from half a street away. This is where London's fine shoes come from. Lady Ashworth's shoes, Lord Ashworth's boots, the cavalry officer's saddle, the footman's gloves. All of it starts here, in these pits, in this smell, in the hands of workers who stand in these vats all day long, and who have a life expectancy that reflects exactly how much of this a human body can absorb before it starts to fail. James doesn't live here. He's from Bethnal Green, which is east and north, but he knows this part of the city the way he knows all parts of the city, as territory to move through, as geography to understand. He stops outside a public house. It's called the Anchor. The sign is old, the paint faded, the anchor itself somewhat optimistic given how far from the river you are. Inside, the room is low-ceilinged and dark, lit by candles and the fire at the back, and it is, even by the standards of a day when everybody in London has been talking all day, extraordinarily loud. The news has been everywhere, all day. And now it's been marinated in alcohol for several hours and has taken on a different character, more confident, more argumentative, more certain, in the way that people become certain when the uncertainty of the world becomes intolerable and ale is cheap. James gets 2 mugs. He hands you one. "Don't make a face," he says. You don't make a face. The ale is weak by London standards, heavy by your standards, and you drink it slowly and look around. What you see is a room containing perhaps 40 people. A third of them are from the tanneries. You can tell by their hands, by the particular set of their shoulders, by the way they hold their mugs with both hands, the way people hold things when their hands are numb from cold water. A third are other tradespeople, indeterminate. A cobbler maybe, a printer. 2 men who look like they might be from the docks further east. The rest are harder to categorize. Women in the corner, 3 of them, talking fast and quiet. A man asleep against the wall in the particular way of someone who has been asleep since before his drink was empty. The conversation is about Victoria, not with reverence, not the reverence you heard in Mayfair. Miss Holtz, she seems so very young. This is something rawer. 18 bloody years old, someone says, not with contempt, with something more complicated. God save her from the ministers. God save her from the men around her. She'll do what they tell her, or she won't. The man who says this is perhaps 40, with the burned-looking hands of someone who works near heat. They said the same about Elizabeth and William. and about every one of them, right back to Alfred, they'll do what they're told, and then sometimes they don't. A pause. She's been kept locked up her whole life. Her mother's got a man running the household who thinks he runs the country. First thing she does when they tell her she's queen is ask for an hour alone. He drinks. First hour of her life without someone watching. What do you think she did with it? Nobody answers. You think about it. What would you do with the first hour of your life that was entirely your own? After 15 years of people telling you what to do, what to wear, where to walk, what to say, when to speak, you'd probably just sit very still and listen to the quiet. That's probably what she did too. The man with the burned hands is still talking. The question is what she does next. King is dead. Parliament's sitting. The Corn Laws are killing us. He waves his mug toward the window, toward the general direction of the rest of the city. 2,000 people dying of fever in Southwark alone last year. 2,000. Children working 12-hour shifts in mills that are 100 miles north of here. And we're going to have a queen who's 18 years old and has never been allowed to walk down a staircase without someone holding her hand. He shakes his head. Either she understands what this country is or she doesn't. If she does, he doesn't finish. If she doesn't, someone asks, then it doesn't matter what she's called. You file that away. Because that's the question, isn't it? Not what the era will be called. Not the name on the history books, the name your grandchildren will learn in their schoolrooms in 40 years. The question is what the name means. Whether the country that calls itself Victorian will be the country where the burned-handed man's children grow up with enough food and a chance at their own hour that belongs to them. The answer, when it comes over 63 years, will be yes and no, and not nearly enough, and also more than you'd think. James taps your arm. Look over there, he says quietly. In the corner booth, a man is writing. He's young, perhaps 25, perhaps less, with ink on his fingers and the particular alert, consuming quality of attention that you will later learn to recognize in journalists and novelists and anyone who makes their living by noticing. He's writing quickly in a small notebook, his eyes moving between the page and the room. Who is he, you ask? Reporter from one of the evening papers. James drinks. You'll see more of them in the next few weeks. Every paper in London wants to know what regular people think, what the city thinks. They'll send men into every pub and workhouse and market and ask, what do you think about the new Queen? What do they print? What they want people to think people think. He shrugs. That's journalism. You watch the young man with the notebook. His pen moves fast. His face has the expression of someone listening to music, attentive, slightly removed, processing at a level below ordinary conversation. You've heard of newspapers. You've seen them occasionally. In London, they're everywhere. Sold at coffee houses, passed between strangers in the street, read aloud in public houses by the one man in the group who reads well enough. The Times, the Morning Chronicle, the Morning Post, the Spectator. Dozens of them, all competing, all claiming to tell you what actually happened, all constructing slightly different versions of the same city. Information is changing. That's something else that's changing in this new era, whether anyone's named it yet or not. The steam printing press can now produce 24,000 pages an hour. 24,000. 100 years ago, a single press produced a few hundred. The machinery of information is outrunning the capacity of anyone to control it, and the Victorians will never quite solve that problem, but they will do extraordinary things with it, including eventually printing books that will describe the real conditions of the country in enough detail that people in comfortable houses will be unable to claim they didn't know. A man named Charles Dickens is 25 years old right now. He published his first book, a collection of sketches about London life, last year. He's working on something else, something bigger, something that begins with a boy born in a workhouse who never knew his name. That book will be published in installments beginning this year. People will read it and weep and argue and press copies into each other's hands and insist that something must be done. The burned-handed man finishes his ale. The reporter in the corner finishes his page, turns it, starts a new one. James stands. We should head back. You drain your mug. The ale sits warm in your chest. Your feet ache. You've been on them since before 6 in the morning, which at this point is 13 hours ago. Outside, the London evening has deepened. The light is finally going, turning the sky above the buildings that deep blue that comes just before dark. The church bells. You've lost count of how many times they've rung today, are starting their nighttime cadence, slower, more measured, the sound of a city settling. You walk back north, over Vauxhall Bridge, the river dark beneath you, the gas lamps beginning to light along the north embankment. This is another thing that's new. The gas lamps installed in parts of the city in the last decade, changing the character of London nights in ways that nobody has quite finished processing yet. A street with gaze lamps is a different proposition than a street without. A street without is the thing the link boys exist for. This is the Victorian era learning to see itself in the dark. Back in Grosvenor Square, the house is quiet. Lord Ashworth still out. Lady Ashworth's windows dark. Mr. Graves somewhere in the depths of the house, probably completing whatever Mr. Graves does when the house is quiet, which you suspect involves nothing so ordinary as sleep. James at the bottom of the back stairs. Well, he says. Well, you say. He looks at you with an expression that isn't quite assessment and isn't quite curiosity. First proper day in London, he says. What do you think? What do you think? You think about the chandler on Davy Street with his black armband and his measured way of talking, about the crowd outside Buckingham Palace, not angry, just looking, about the burned-handed man in the anchor pub asking what she does next, about the reporter in the corner writing it all down. I think it's the beginning of something, you say, and then, because 15-year-olds are sometimes more honest than they mean to be, I just don't know what. James considers this for a moment. Neither does anyone else, he says. That's the thing about the beginning of something. You never know what it is until you're in the middle of it. He starts up the stairs, pauses. Get some sleep, Thomas. Tomorrow it starts properly. You lie in the dark and listen to London. It's quieter now, not silent. London is never silent, but quieter. The ale voices from the streets below, scattered, sporadic. A horse somewhere. The bells marking the hour. One of them, somewhere in the middle distance, slightly off from the others, like a member of a choir who's found their own tempo. Your attic room, with its one small window that gives onto the backs of the houses on Upper Brook Street, is warm from the day's heat stored in the plaster and the timber. The straw mattress pokes you in the familiar place. Peter is already asleep. You close your eyes. You think about the era that has started today. Already, whether anyone has named it yet or not. You think about what a name means. Why does it matter what you call 60 years of history? Why does it matter that it is the Victorian era and not the Alexandrian or the Melburnian or simply the 19th century? It matters because names carry weight. A name for an era is a claim about what the era was for. The Regency says, This was the time of the prince, of pleasure, of wit at the expense of depth. The Age of Enlightenment says this was the time when thinking was the project, the dark ages. That's what someone else calls you from the outside once you're done. Nobody calls their own age dark while they're living in it. Victorian, the Victorian era, named for a woman, named for a specific woman, not a concept, not a principle, not a movement, a person. A person who was 18 years old this morning in a nightgown in Kensington Palace. The era will take her character in the way that long reigns do. Not her character exactly. History is never that simple, but her outline, the shape of what she thought mattered, the boundaries of what she thought was possible, her very long opinion about what it meant to be decent and hard-working and responsible to something larger than yourself. She will be queen for 63 years. She will outlive her husband by 40 years. She will outlive 2 of her own children. She will survive 8 assassination attempts, which suggests either remarkable luck or remarkable unpopularity depending on how you count. She will expand and contract the empire, make and unmake ministers, correspond with heads of state across the world in a handwriting that becomes increasingly difficult to read as she ages, and that nonetheless gets responded to immediately, because it is the handwriting of the Queen. She will not be a simple person. Simple people do not survive 63 years in power. She will be stubborn and warm and petty and visionary and deeply loving and occasionally vindictive and committed, always to some version of duty that she never quite lets anyone else define for her. She will be Victorian in all of it. And the era that takes her name will be all of those things too, stubborn and warm, petty and visionary, deeply loving of certain things and occasionally vindictive toward others, committed to a version of duty that it constructs as it goes, never quite letting anyone else define it. It will change the world, not always for better, sometimes catastrophically for worse, but it will change it, in a way that makes the world you'll be living in, wherever you are, whenever you're listening to this, the direct successor of decisions and discoveries and disasters and triumphs that began on the 20th of June 1837 in a room in Kensington Palace. Sleep pulls at you. The city goes quieter. Weeks pass. The official proclamation happens at St. James's Palace on the 21st, the day after William dies. You don't see it. You're working. But James does, in his free hour, and he describes it to you that evening in the kitchen while Mrs. Fry makes disapproving sounds about people who neglect their duties for spectacle. Heralds, James says, in full livery, with trumpets, and they read the proclamation in a voice you could hear 3 streets away. God save the Queen. He shakes his head. First time I've heard that. Queen. Takes some getting used to. It does take some getting used to. The city is full of it. Every shop, every pub, every pamphlet. The new stamps will have her face. The new coins will have her face. Every official document in the country, from Acts of Parliament to court summonses to the customs forms that track every ship arriving in every harbour, will carry her name. Victorian England. It starts with that. With names and faces and the decision to call the era after a person. Lord Ashworth's house returns to something like normal by the end of the first week. Normal in a Mayfair house in 1837 has a particular texture. It has the texture of a world where everything is organised around the needs of approximately 8 people and maintained by approximately 22 others, and where the gulf between those 2 groups is so fundamental that it's almost geographic. You're on the south side of that gulf, in the basement, in the attic, in the corridors between rooms, invisible when invisible is required, present when present is required, your hands doing work that makes the north side of the gulf function smoothly, with no evidence of the work itself. Mr. Graves says, on your third week, you're not supposed to be seen. He's showing you how to enter a room with a tray, quietly from the left, making no contact with the guests, exiting before anyone has registered that you've been there. You're not supposed to be heard. The measure of your success in this house is that at the end of your service here, Lord Ashworth will not be able to remember your name. You stand in the room after he's left and think about that. Your name erased. Your presence unmemorable. Success measured by invisibility. You're 15. The Victorian era is 3 weeks old. And someone has just explained to you, with complete seriousness, that the ideal version of your working life is one in which you make no impression on it whatsoever. You decide, quietly and without speaking it, that you disagree. This is also very Victorian. The silent, private, unspoken disagreement. The thing you keep inside you while your hands do what they're told. Summer deepens. July becomes August. The city changes its quality with the heat. Thicker, slower, the smell of the Thames becoming something that you've heard the better-heeled residents of Westminster describe as miasma, which is the Latin-derived word for bad air that they use because it sounds more scientific than the other words available. The river is not, in 1837, a clean river. The river is where London puts things that it doesn't want to look at. And what London doesn't want to look at is everything that its 2 million inhabitants produce in the process of being alive. The cholera outbreak of 1832 killed thousands. The cause was not yet known. The Victorians will figure that out gradually, painfully over the next 30 years, first dismissing the right answer and then arriving at it anyway. The Thames is the source, the water company is the mechanism, the pump is the key. But that's coming. Right now the river is the river and the city is the city, and you're carrying a tray with a glass of cordial for Lady Ashworth's visitor in the upstairs drawing room. The visitor is a woman approximately Lady Ashworth's age, late 40s, with a face that has the compressed, precise quality of a woman who has strong opinions about many things, and has learned to keep them below the surface where they can do the most damage when released. Her name is Mrs. Drummond, and she is, Lady Ashworth told Miss Holt in the corridor outside the drawing-room yesterday. You were there with your tray, invisible, from Shropshire, and has been in London for the season, which is ending now. The great houses beginning to close up as the wealthy leave the city for the country, before the August heat becomes intolerable. You put down the cordial, you step back, you become furniture. Mrs. Drummond is talking about the Queen. She rides beautifully, she says. I saw her in Hyde Park last Thursday, on a grey horse, completely alone, well, with her escort, obviously, but without the Duchess, without Conroy. She says the name with a particular inflection. Without any of that. She picks up her tea. She looked as if she'd been let out of a very small room into a very large garden, Lady Ashworth. She was a pause. She's been riding every morning, I hear, and meeting the ministers in the evening, and reading dispatches, and writing letters. She's been in correspondence with every head of state in Europe already, apparently. Her German is perfect, her French acceptable. Mrs. Drummond sets down her cup. Lord Melbourne is teaching her the rest. He's very attentive, people say. People say a great deal. Mrs. Drummond's tone doesn't quite add the word naturally, but it's there in the undertone. What they say specifically is that she trusts him completely, which, given that she's 18 and has never been allowed to trust anyone, is perhaps inevitable. Is it appropriate? What I think, says Mrs. Drummond, is that a girl who's been controlled since birth is going to attach her trust to the first person who treats her like a thinking being. Whether or not Melbourne is that person in substance or in performance, he's certainly that person in effect. She writes to him in the evenings. She receives him every morning. She relies on his political judgment entirely. A pause. For now. You think it will change? Everything changes, says Mrs. Drummond. That's the only constant about this country. The Whigs think they have her. The Tories think they'll get her. Melbourne thinks he's indispensable. She picks up her cup again. She's 18. She's clever. She's been in a cage for 8 years. She sips. In my experience, clever people who've been in cages tend to take extremely careful note of where the keys are kept. You carry the tray back to the kitchen and think about clever people and cages and keys. It is August of 1837, and the Victorian Era is exactly 2 months old, and the woman at the centre of it is still figuring out what she's going to be. Autumn. The house changes its rhythm. Lord Ashworth is at the family seat in Norfolk for September and October. The London house runs on a skeleton staff. You're part of the skeleton, and the rhythms become slower, more intimate, fewer people. The sounds of the house, always the sounds. You've learned to read the house entirely by sound. The particular creak of different floorboards, the way the wind comes through the third floor window latch at night, become more audible. You have more time. You learn to read better than you could before. There's a small library off the butler's pantry, Mr. Graves's personal books, and they're not what you'd expect from a butler. Not etiquette manuals and household management. Philosophy. History. One worn copy of Paradise Lost with notes in the margins in a handwriting too small to decipher. A book on practical astronomy. Mr. Graves, your learning, is not what you assumed. He finds you with a history book one afternoon. You expect the pause, the expression that suggests disappointment in a form so refined it's almost polite. Instead, he sits down. What are you reading? History of England, you say. By. You check the spine. Mr. Hume. Hume. He nods. A Scotsman who understood England better than most Englishmen. What part? The Civil War. The English Civil War, which the Scots simply call the Civil War, since they were rather more centrally involved in starting it than the English give them credit for. He doesn't say this with warmth exactly. He doesn't do things with warmth, Mr. Graves, but with something that might be called precision, the satisfaction of accurate correction. Sir John Conroy, you say, because you've been thinking about it all day and it comes out before you can stop it. Mrs. Drummond said he's been controlling the household at Kensington for years. How did he manage that? The butler of a royal household? Mr. Graves looks at you. The look is long, not angry, something else. He was not the butler, he says at last. He was the comptroller of the household, an entirely different matter. A pause. And how he managed it is the same way that anyone manages to hold power over someone else, by making themselves indispensable to the people around the person, and by making the person doubt their own judgment. Silence. The Kensington system, he says, was built on one principle. Victoria was to believe that the world outside was dangerous, and that she needed protection from it. The protection was provided by Conroy and the Duchess. The danger was, in most cases, invented. He pauses. When she became queen, the system ended. She dismissed him. Politely but immediately. First thing, he stands. Put the book back when you're finished. He walks out. You sit with the book in your hands and the conversation in your head for a long time. The Kensington system. A girl told she needs protection from a world that was, in fact, mostly safe. Told she was fragile when she was demonstrably not. Kept small to make others feel large. And then dismissed. Immediately. First thing, you have more respect for the girl in the nightgown than you started with, and you started with a reasonable amount. Winter. The house comes back to life in November. Lord and Lady Ashworth return from Norfolk, which is apparently magnificent and cold in that order. The household expands, more fires to lay, more meals to serve, more standing in corridors trying to be invisible, and London changes again. Winter London is a different animal from summer London. The fog comes in. Not mist, fog. The particular London fog that's not weather but industrial product. Coal smoke from 10,000 chimneys mixing with the river damp and whatever the tanneries are adding to the air from south of the river, creating a yellow-grey soup that reduces visibility to arm's length on bad days and clings to your coat and your hair and the inside of your lungs. You learn to breathe through your mouthpiece of cloth when it's bad. Most people do. The fog has a taste. It tastes like the inside of a fireplace. This is also the Victorian era. The coal smoke and the fog and the children with persistent coughs in the streets. The price of warmth in a city built of cold stone, but also the gas lamps in the fog. The way a single gas lamp on a foggy November night in London creates a world of its own. A sphere of warm light in the grey, and inside that sphere, for just a moment, everything visible and specific and clear. A man walking, a woman with a basket, a cat on a step. And then they pass through the sphere and back into the fog and are gone. London at night in winter is those spheres of lamplight in the grey. It's beautiful, in a melancholy way that the Victorians will spend 60 years trying to articulate, and will eventually just call Dickensian once Dickens has named it for them. Speaking of whom? At some point in November, you're not sure of the exact date, but the fog is thick and the evenings have closed in. James brings a copy of something to the kitchen table. A book, but not a book exactly. More precisely, a part of a book, printed on cheap paper and stapled. The Pickwick Papers, published in instalments. The last instalment came out a week ago, and James has it. And he reads aloud to the kitchen after supper while Mrs. Fry makes sounds of moderate disapproval and Peter falls asleep in his chair. You listen, and you understand somewhere in the second chapter that this is going to be important, not just as entertainment, though it's entertaining unmistakably, in a way that books you've encountered before, the earnest instructional volumes in Mr. Graves' library, are not. But important in a way that's harder to name. This is someone seeing London, really seeing it. The comic, and the horrible, and the human, and the specific, all mixed together in the way that London itself is mixed together. This is Victorian writing. The era has found its voice already, 2 months in, through a 25-year-old from Kent who'd spent years reporting on Parliament and felt rather strongly that there was more to say. Months pass. You learn the house. You learn the streets. You learn the difference between Mayfair and Marylebone, and Clerkenwell and Spitalfields in the same way you learn the difference between different qualities of leather, by touch, by smell, by something that eventually becomes instinct. You learn the economics of the city roughly by paying attention. The price of coal goes up in cold weather. The price of vegetables goes up when the roads from the country are bad. The price of a seat on a coach goes down when the railway starts offering the same journey faster and cheaper. That's the thing to watch, James tells you. The railway. the railway. In 1837, the railway is new enough to still seem miraculous, and old enough for some people to have already become blasé about it. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened in 1830. The Birmingham and London Railway is opening this very year. Steam power moving people across England at speeds that horses can't match. The world is getting smaller. The journey from London to Birmingham takes hours now instead of days. Lord Ashworth has shares in a railway company. He tells Lady Ashworth this at dinner one evening. The door is open by an inch. You're in the corridor, invisible, with a satisfaction that suggests the shares are performing well. The railways will change everything. Not slowly. Fast. Faster than anything that's changed in England since the introduction of the printing press. They will move people and goods and information at speeds that make the old world obsolete. They will create new cities around station junctions. They will kill off turnpike roads and canal companies and coaching inns. They will make it possible for a factory owner in Manchester to receive an order from a customer in London and dispatch the goods on the same day and have them arrive the next morning. They will make it possible for a soldier to be recalled from leave in Scotland and be in London in 12 hours. They will also kill people. They're not safe, the early railways. They run too fast and brake too late, and the carriages are not designed with much consideration for the structural comfort of their contents. But they will get safer, as things do, once enough people have been killed that the mathematics of safety start to seem more compelling. This is also very Victorian, though. The enthusiasm and the recklessness and the gradual grudging attention to consequences. Spring of 1838, and you have something to show for it. Your first year in service, your hands hardened, your knowledge of the city expanded past anything you could have mapped when you arrived, your accent slightly modified, not changed, not erased, but smoothed at the edges, the vowels of Yorkshire still there but less immediately alarming to southern ears. And something else, something harder to name. You're beginning to understand what this era is, not from the history books, not from the newspapers, from the texture of days, from the accumulation of small things, the mourning ribbons, the railway shares, the fog, the gas lamps, the Pickwick papers, the burned-handed man in the pub, Victoria on her grey horse in Hyde Park. An era is not a collection of great events. The great events are the surface. An era is what happens between the great events. It's what you eat for breakfast and what the air smells like and who is allowed to be invisible and who is required to be visible and what you're allowed to want and who gets to have it. The Victorian era, at this early stage, is a country deciding what it wants to be. It has enormous power. It has enormous problems it's choosing to look away from. It has a queen who is surprising people every day with the stubbornness of her own thinking and the precision of her own will. It has a novelist who is making it laugh and cry at itself simultaneously. It has a railway that is making it physically smaller. It has you, in a corridor in Mayfair, 16 now, years old, carrying a tray, learning to be invisible and deciding quietly to be visible anyway, at least on the inside. June the 28th, 1838, the coronation. You have known it was coming for months. The city has been building toward it the way a wave builds, slowly at first, then faster, until on the day itself the energy of it is overwhelming, and you have to make a physical effort not to be swept off your feet. Lord Ashworth has seats in Westminster Abbey. He and Lady Ashworth will be there in full formal dress, part of the 1,000 and more peers and dignitaries packed into the Abbey. They left at 7 in the morning. Mr. Graves oversaw their departure with the precision of a military operation, and then, for the first time in a year, you have the morning entirely to yourself, not an hour, not two, the whole morning. The house is skeleton-staffed, the rest have been given time, not out of generosity exactly, more out of a recognition that the alternative is everyone slipping away without permission anyway, and that is both undignified and impossible to manage. James grabs your arm on the way out. Come on then. The city is extraordinary. You step out of Grosvenor Square and into a London that has been transforming since midnight. The decorations went up days ago. Flags and bunting on every public building, blue and gold, and the royal cipher everywhere. VR, Victoria Regina, in letters and ribbons and painted on boards. But now the people have come. More people than you've ever seen in one place in your life. More people than your village has seen in its entire history. Every street between Mayfair and Westminster is packed. Not just full, overflowing, compressed. A single body of humanity pressing toward the route of the procession, which runs from Buckingham Palace through Hyde Park Corner and along Piccadilly and down toward Westminster. You move through it the way James has taught you to move through crowds. Shoulder first, polite but not hesitant, apologising when necessary but not slowing. The two of you cut through back streets, through alleys, to get ahead of the main press and find a position on the route. The smell of a crowd, the particular dense human warmth of thousands of bodies pressed together in the June sun, tobacco and food and animal and the occasional sharp edge of gin. Hawkers selling everything. Coronation ribbons, coronation mugs, images of the Queen printed on cheap paper, pies, ale, something unidentified that's probably meat. Coronation mugs, a woman with a basket calling out, "Take a coronation mug home, remember the day." The mugs, when you see them, are plain white pottery with a crown painted on and the date. 28th June, 1838. The sort of thing that ends up at the back of a kitchen cupboard for 30 years, pulled out occasionally when someone's feeling sentimental. You end up in a position on the south side of Piccadilly, about 3 people deep from the edge of the road. Not bad. James has his height. You have your elbows. And then you wait. Waiting in a crowd before something happens has a quality you've never encountered before. Not boredom. The opposite of boredom. A heightened collective attention. Every conversation in a 20-foot radius is about the same thing. Every eye is on the same point down the road. Children on shoulders. Old women with good positions they've been guarding since before dawn. Men who have clearly already celebrated somewhat. A group of apprentices from somewhere, jostling, comparing their views of the road. A woman beside you, perhaps 35, with a good coat and her hair pinned very precisely under a bonnet, has been here for 3 hours. You know this because she tells you, in the way that strangers in English crowds tell each other things that they would never say in any other context. "She's from Somerset," she says. "She came up last week especially. She's staying with her sister's family in Paddington." "I need to see her," the woman says. "I need to see her in person. I've had her portrait in my sitting room since she became queen. My daughters talk about her every day." She shakes her head. They've grown up knowing there's a woman on the throne. They think it's ordinary. She pauses. They should. They should think it's ordinary. But I remember when it was impossible. I'm old enough to remember thinking about what comes after William, and never once imagining. She stops. She doesn't finish the sentence. The sound starts before the procession is visible. A sound unlike anything you've heard before. Not the cheering of a crowd, though that's part of it. Something deeper, something that has the physical quality of a large organ note, felt in the chest, in the sternum, as much as heard in the ears. The combined voice of several 100,000 people reaching some kind of collective point at the same moment, in real time. No delay. The news of the procession moving from the head of the crowd backward like a wave. Then the cavalry. First the cavalry. Horses, enormous, bright-coated, their breath visible in the morning air despite the June heat, moving in columns, their hooves on the cobbles making a sound like a sustained roll of thunder. The riders in full uniform, brilliant, precise, their swords at their sides, their faces forward. Then the coaches. A procession of coaches, each one more elaborate than the last, carrying dignitaries and ministers and officials in full court dress, their faces solemn, and their positions requiring them to look dignified despite the crowds pressing toward them on both sides, despite the noise. And then, you feel it before you see it, the sound changes quality again, rises further. Then the state coach, the gold state coach, built in 1762, used for coronations ever since. 24 feet long, 8 feet wide, drawn by 8 grey horses, painted and gilded and hung with carved figures, tritons at the 4 corners, the roof surmounted by a crown, gilded and carved and painted in a way that makes it look less like a vehicle and more like a mobile building, a fragment of palace placed on wheels and sent into the streets, and inside. You see her. You see her for perhaps 4 seconds as the coach passes your position. 4 seconds. You will remember them for the rest of your life. She's in white and gold. Her crown is on her head, a small crown, surprisingly small, the imperial state crown, which is enormous by normal crown standards and nevertheless looks almost delicate against the gold of the coach. She is 21 inches shorter than most of the men who will advise her today. She's 18 years and 34 days old. Her face is composed, controlled, not blank, not the expression of someone who is trying not to feel things, the expression of someone who is feeling everything and has decided deliberately which of those things to let be visible. She is holding herself very straight. Her hands in white gloves are still in her lap. The woman from Somerset beside you says nothing. She's watching with an expression that isn't easily described. Something between recognition and grief, and something that might be the opposite of grief. Her eyes are wet. The coach passes. The sound follows it, chasing down the street. And then it's gone. James finds your arm. Was it worth it? He asks. You stand in the dispersing crowd and try to find words for 4 seconds of a small woman in white, in a gilded coach, and the sound of several 100,000 people all deciding the same thing at the same moment. Yes, you say. You walk back through Mayfair in the June morning, the streets beginning to thin, the coronation already becoming memory, the flags and the bunting still up, the coronation mugs being carried home by people who will put them in kitchen cupboards and forget them, and then find them decades later when they're old and think, I was there, I saw her. In Westminster Abbey, right now, the coronation ceremony is ongoing. It's a long ceremony. It will be 5 hours before it's done. Victoria has been on her feet for most of the morning. The Archbishop of Canterbury will at one point force the coronation ring onto the wrong finger, and it will be agony to remove it afterward. The orb will be handed to her too early and she'll have to hold it through 2 long sections of the service before anyone takes it back. Nobody will tell the public that part. The official record will note only, the ceremony proceeded with great dignity and splendour. The splendour is true, the dignity is true, the aching finger and the heavy orb are also true. The Victorians are going to be extremely good at making sure only certain kinds of truth get into the official record. This, too, is very Victorian. Back in the house, the afternoon is strange. The skeleton staff sits in the kitchen with cups of tea and talks about what they've seen and what they've heard, sharing stories of the crowd, comparing positions, comparing views. Mrs. Fry, who went out earlier and came back before 11, describes the cavalry horses with an accuracy that suggests she had a better position than anyone admits. Peter, who got closest to the actual route, and therefore saw the least because he couldn't see over anyone's head, is aggrieved in a good-natured way that makes everyone laugh. James, who saw what you saw, says nothing but sits at the table with his cup and an expression of private satisfaction. And you sit in the kitchen of a Mayfair house and eat a piece of bread and drink your tea and think about an 18-year-old girl in a white dress sitting in a 5-hour ceremony with a ring on the wrong finger and an orb she wasn't supposed to be holding yet, and coming out of it at the end Queen, incontrovertibly, officially, documented in every language and recorded in every history, Queen Victoria, first day of the Victorian Era, properly, with the crown on the right head and everything. This is the beginning, and now it goes. Now time moves the way it moves inside a long reign, in seasons, in waves. The immediate events become the middle distance, and the middle distance becomes history. The weeks after the coronation, Victoria, now properly crowned, navigating the politics of her court with a precision that surprises people who assumed she would be guided. Melbourne still at her side, advising but less indispensably. She's learning. She's always learning. She has the particular kind of intelligence that absorbs everything around it and converts it into understanding faster than people expect. Autumn of 1838. There are debates in Parliament about the condition of the poor. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 is working, some say. It's working by making the workhouse so miserable that nobody wants to be in one, which is technically solving the problem of people wanting poor relief by making the alternative to poor relief unbearable. Charles Dickens is writing about workhouses right now. He has opinions. They are not flattering. The burned-handed man from the Anchor pub in Suffolk, you think about him sometimes, though you'll never see him again. You think about whether his children have shoes, whether his wife is well, whether the tannery pit he stands in for 12 hours a day is killing him slowly or quickly. In a house in Mayfair, these thoughts don't have anywhere to go. You carry trays and you stand in corridors and you think thoughts that have no outlet. This is also very Victorian. The private consciousness of people who have no public voice. The vast interior monologue of the invisible half of the country. Eventually it will find outlets. Eventually the Reform Acts will expand the franchise. Eventually the trade unions will organise. Eventually the Education Acts will require that children learn to read, even children in Yorkshire who are needed for the mill. Eventually all of these things. Not yet. Winter of 1838. Lord Ashworth mentions at breakfast. The door is open, you're in the corridor. That there's talk in court circles of the Queen's affection for a German prince, her cousin Albert. He visited earlier this year, apparently. She wrote about him in her journals in terms that her mother found alarming and that everyone else found charming. He's 20, she's 19. She'll need to marry, Lord Ashworth says, not unkindly. The country needs an heir, and a queen who marries makes the court simpler, someone to advise her who isn't on the government payroll. Lady Ashworth says nothing. Melbourne can't last. The Tories will have their turn soon enough. She needs someone who's hers, not the government's, not the court's. A pause. And by all accounts, the German boy is suitable. Suitable. What a word to use about a person. But love is coming. Even you can tell from the outside, from the second-hand information. Love is coming between Victoria and Albert, and when it comes, it will be the kind of love that becomes part of the furniture of the Victorian era itself, inseparable from the era's character, from its obsessions, from its grief when Albert dies in 1861, and Victoria spends the next 40 years in mourning that makes the formal court mourning for William IV look positively casual. She will wear black for 40 years. She will keep his shaving water laid out in the morning for decades after he's gone. She will insist when she finally dies in 1901 on being buried with a plaster cast of his hand. The Victorians will think this is appropriate. This is also very Victorian. The loving unto death and beyond, the romantic absolutism of it, the refusal to let go of anything worth keeping even when all conventional reason says to let go. Spring of 1839. You're 17. You've been in service 2 years. You can navigate the city alone in the dark. You can negotiate with suppliers, silver-tongued when necessary, honest when honesty serves better. You can be invisible when invisible is required. And you've started to be visible in one other way. In the mornings, in your own hour, before the house wakes. You've started writing. In a small notebook you bought for twopence from a street stall in Drury Lane. Small handwriting to make the pages last. What you write would not impress anyone. It wouldn't impress you in 30 years looking back at it. But you're writing down what you see. The burned-handed man, the 4 seconds of the coronation coach, Mrs. Drummond on Clever People and Cages, Mr. Graves on Paradise Lost, James on Everything Changing, a record of the invisible half. You're not sure why you're doing it. You're not sure it matters, but you keep doing it anyway. Summer of 1839. Victoria's government falls nearly. The bedchamber crisis, a phrase that will seem absurd to later historians and was also absurd at the time, though nobody dared say it out loud. Robert Peel, the Tory leader, trying to form a new government, asks Victoria to dismiss certain ladies of the bedchamber who are political Whigs. Victoria refuses. She will not have her household managed by a politician. She says so clearly and with a firmness that sends Peel back empty-handed. Melbourne returns. The Whigs stay in government. The country is impressed. The country is also mildly alarmed. A queen who takes strong positions on who manages her household is a queen who might take strong positions on other things too. This turns out to be correct. And yet the era that bears her name will relentlessly insist that women are not equipped for strong positions, that women's nature inclines toward compliance, toward the domestic, toward a necessary subordination to the more rational male mind. The woman on the throne will spend 63 years being both the evidence against and the reluctant symbol of this argument. She will support in many of its aspects the conventional view of women's place. She will herself say, late in life, that she finds the idea of women's suffrage absurd, and she will rule absolutely for 63 years. The contradiction will never be resolved. Autumn of 1839. Word comes through James, through the stable boy, through whatever invisible network of information carries news from the higher floors to the lower, that the German cousin has come back. Albert, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He's arrived in England ostensibly as a visit. The court is on tenterhooks. The Queen is apparently quite animated. They'll be engaged before the month is out. She will propose to him herself because by protocol she must. Queens cannot be proposed to. She will sit him down and tell him that it would make her too happy if he would consent to what she wished. He will consent. He will by all accounts be genuinely delighted to consent. They will marry in February. Victoria will wear white, a choice that will become the defining fashion of Victorian bridal culture, a tradition that didn't exist before her, and that she essentially invented by deciding she liked white, and that white would do. The Victorian era is 3 years old, and it's already changing the world's wedding customs. The morning of your 2nd anniversary in service, Mr. Graves finds you in the butler's pantry. He stands in the doorway for a moment, the usual expressionless precision of his face undisturbed by whatever he's come to say. "You've been here 2 years, he says. "Yes, sir." "Lord Ashworth wishes to offer you a position as a junior footman proper, with corresponding wages." He pauses. "An increase of 2 shillings weekly." You stand very still. 2 shillings weekly is not enormous. In the mathematics of Mayfair household wages, it is not a fortune. But it is, in the mathematics of your own life, of the 6 shillings you arrived with, of the 2pence notebooks and the borrowed books and the ale at the Anchor pub. It is something. It is recognition, which is what 2 shillings means in a house where the measure of success is invisibility. "Yes, sir," you say. "Thank you." Mr. Graves nods. The nod is barely a nod. More the suggestion of a nod. "You are not," he says, "as useless as I expected." He walks out. You stand in the pantry for a moment, alone, and allow yourself something that might be described as satisfaction. The small kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. That's enough. That's quite enough. The Victorian era moves forward. It always does. It has the quality of the railways it loves so much. Once it gets going, there's very little that slows it down, and you can see it coming from a long way away, and it's still going to get there before you're ready. Albert arrives. Victoria and Albert. They'll become a single compound noun in the public consciousness almost immediately. A partnership, an image, a king in everything but title. Because the Queen will not give him the title King Consort. She cannot quite bring herself to that. But in everything else she makes him her full partner, her advisor, her trusted other half. He will change things. He has the German thoroughness and the reforming instinct and the deep desire to be useful in a way that could almost be called Victorian itself, except that it predates the era. It's just what he is. He will help organise the Great Exhibition of 1851. He will reform the running of the royal household. He will be the first British royal to take an active interest in science and engineering and manufacturing. He will die at 42 of typhoid in 1861, and the country will grieve as if a part of itself has gone, which it has. All of that is coming. Right now it's the early days of 1840, the young Queen just proposed to, the country adjusting to the idea of a prince consort from Saxe-Coburg, and outside the windows of a house in Mayfair, London is doing what it always does, proceeding, at volume, at pace, with more simultaneous projects and problems than any city of its time should rationally be able to sustain. The railways are expanding. The Manchester-Birmingham line opened. The Great Western is running. New stations going up in places that haven't been built up yet, around which new neighbourhoods will organise themselves. New streets, new hotels, new everything. The population is growing. London in 1831 was 1.6 million. In 1841 it will be nearly 2 million. In 1851, 2.4 million. In 1871, 3.2 million. The city is eating land on every side, the Victorian terraced houses going up in rows and rows and rows, regular as the ribs of some vast animal, spreading south into Brixton and north into Islington and east into Stepney, digesting village after village, turning market gardens into streets. The city you've come to know is already changing. James moves on. In the spring of 1840, he takes a position as head footman in a house in Belgravia. Better wages, better prospects. He comes by Grosvenor Square on his last afternoon, still in the livery of the new house, and they're better than Lord Ashworth's livery. The gold braid more elaborate, the coat a better cut. He looks different, not in face, in position. Already carrying himself with the authority of the senior man. Thomas, he says. He uses your name. He doesn't always. James, how are you finding it? I'm finding it, you say. He nods, considers you. You'll be all right, he says. Not as a comfort. As an assessment. The same way Mr. Graves assessed things. Economically, precisely. You pay attention. That's half of it. A pause. The other half is deciding what you're paying attention for. He offers his hand. You shake it. He walks down the street. The sun is on his back. He turns the corner onto Upper Brook Street and is gone. Deciding what you're paying attention for. You carry that one for a long time. New roommate in the attic. Different face. Different name, same bewildered energy of someone who arrived in London with a canvas bag and couldn't understand why anyone would choose to live like this when there was perfectly good countryside available. You tell him it gets easier. He doesn't believe you. He will. The years move. 1840. Victoria and Albert married in February. She wears white to the wedding, which is her own choice. Impractical and beautiful and immediately influential on every bride in the country. She looks terrified in the portraits. She was terrified. She'll say so in her journals. Terrified and happy in equal measure, which might be the most accurate description of the beginning of love ever written by a queen. 1841. The Tories finally come in. Robert Peel forms his government. Victoria grudgingly allows it. She does not allow him to dismiss her ladies. This time he doesn't try. He's learned. Everyone learns eventually how far Victoria's compliance extends and where it stops. She's pregnant. Again. She'll have 9 children. 9. Over the course of the next 17 years. Which she will find both joyful and mildly insulting, as she considered childbirth an undignified process, and didn't entirely forgive Albert for his part in requiring it. She loves her children. She also loses patience with them fairly regularly, and describes them in her journals with a bracing directness that would horrify the people who read her public pronouncements. This is also Victorian. The gap between the public face and the private one. The enormous machinery of decorum that the era constructs around itself, and the very human, very complicated, sometimes very funny reality underneath. 1844. You are 22. You've been in service 7 years. Junior footman, become, as of 3 months ago, senior footman. Your wages are enough to save a modest amount. Your hands are hard and your back is accustomed to the work and your knowledge of the city is encyclopedic. You've started reading newspapers. Regularly. Not just catching fragments of what other people are reading. Buying them yourself. 1 penny for the Times on Tuesdays because the Tuesday edition has the parliamentary reports. And you've developed, quietly and without telling anyone, a deep interest in what Parliament is arguing about. What Parliament is arguing about in 1844 is railways, mostly. The railway mania is coming. the speculative frenzy that will peak in 1846 and bust in 1847. Thousands of people investing everything they have in railway stocks. Hundreds of companies formed to build lines that will never be built. Fortunes made and lost in months. The papers are full of it. Lord Ashworth has opinions about it. Strong ones. He's made money in railways already, and has the particular ferocity of someone who believes their success is a result of judgment rather than timing. James would say that's what good investors always believe, usually until they stop being right. James is a head footman now in Belgravia. You hear of him occasionally through the network, doing well, moving up. One evening in the spring you pass Mr. Graves in the corridor outside the servants' hall. He's going out, which happens rarely enough that you notice it. Coat on, hat in hand. "Good evening, sir," you say. He pauses. The pause by now you've learned to read. This one says, "I am choosing to respond. Thomas." He settles the hat. "If you have a moment." You have a moment. He takes you to the library. Not his private library. The house library. The proper one on the first floor that smells of leather and wood oil and the particular dry sweetness of old pages. He stands in the centre of it. He's 58 now, you think. He's never said. "I'm going to retire," he says, "at the end of the year." You say nothing. You wait. "I have recommended to Lord Ashworth that you be considered for the position of under-butler." He looks at the books rather than at you. You are young. 22 is young. But you're not unsuitable. The words sit between you. Not unsuitable. From Mr. Graves, who once told you that the measure of success in service was complete invisibility, who said you are not as useless as I expected. From him, not unsuitable is very close to the highest compliment available. "Thank you, sir," you say. He nods. His nod, after 7 years, you can now read with precision. This one says, "The conversation is concluded, and I find myself slightly uncomfortable with having conducted it." He goes out. You stand in the library and breathe in the smell of leather and old paper, and the Victorian era proceeding around you, unstoppable, filling in every space with railways and legislation, and Dickens novels, and the increasing conviction that something must be done about the poor, even if doing it is complicated. Something must be done. The Victorian era will say this more times than you can count. It will say it about the workhouses, the factories, the cholera, the education, the railways, the empire, the condition of women, the condition of men in the tanneries, the condition of children up chimneys. It will say something must be done and then argue furiously about who should do it and how, and whether doing it is the government's business or the church's business or the individual's own business that no one else should interfere with. And slowly, imperfectly, making a great deal of noise about it the whole time, it will do things. The 10 Hours Act, limiting factory work for women and children to 10 hours a day, passed in 1847 after decades of campaigning. The Public Health Act of 1848, after cholera kills 50,000 people in a single outbreak, and finally forces the conclusion that maybe doing nothing about the water supply is not a policy. The Education Act of 1870, making elementary schooling available to every child. None of these are quick. None are clean. Each one is the result of decades of arguments and pamphlets and articles and investigations by people who went into places nobody comfortable wanted to look at, and came back and forced the comfortable to look at them. Edwin Chadwick, writing reports on the sanitary conditions of the poor that are so detailed and so damning that people read them and cannot claim not to have known. Henry Mayhew, who spent years interviewing London's street sellers and crossing sweepers and mudlarks and prostitutes, and published it all in a book that made the invisible visible. Florence Nightingale, who went to the Crimea and came back with statistics that proved incontrovertibly that more soldiers were dying of preventable disease than of enemy action, and who used those statistics to change British medicine. The Victorian era believed in evidence. It believed in facts. It built institutions to collect them. The census, expanded and regularised. The Royal Statistical Society, the General Register Office, recording births and deaths and marriages for the first time with systematic thoroughness. You cannot manage what you cannot measure. The Victorians understood this, and so they measured. This is part of what makes the era Victorian rather than simply 19th century, the project of looking at itself, really looking, not through the comfortable lens of what it wanted to be true, but through the cold lens of what the numbers said. The numbers said things that were very uncomfortable. The numbers said that in the 1840s, the average age at death for a labourer in Manchester was 17. Not life expectancy, average age at death, including all those children who died before 5, which brought the average down into territory that made Manchester sound like somewhere in the Middle Ages rather than the industrial heart of the most powerful nation on earth. The numbers said that in 1849, cholera killed 53,000 people in England and Wales. The numbers said that in 1851, the Great Exhibition, Albert's project, the showcase of Victorian industrial achievement, the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park with its millions of exhibits from every corner of the empire, attracted 6 million visitors, which was more than a third of the entire population of England and Wales, all coming to see the thing that Victorian progress had made. Both of these things are true simultaneously. The 53,000 dead and the 6 million visitors. The cholera in the water and the Crystal Palace in the park. The same era, the same country, the same city, half a mile separating the magnificence from the misery. This is what the Victorian era is, in the end. Not the crinolines or the empire or the railway mania or the moral earnestness or the Dickens novels or Victoria in white on her wedding day. All of that is true. All of that is part of it. But the core of it, the thing that makes it an era rather than just a stretch of years, the core of it is this: the capacity to hold enormous contradictions, to look at them clearly, to have the tools to see them clearly, the newspapers and the statistics and the novels and the reports, and to continue choosing every day which contradictions to act on and which ones to live with. Every era does this. Every era chooses which truths to face and which ones to fold into the furniture of the background. The Victorians were not worse at this than any other era, but they were perhaps more earnest about it, more convinced that the right answer existed and could be found, more committed to looking, even when looking hurt. That's part of why the era took the name of one specific person. Victoria was all of that too. She saw things clearly when she wanted to. She chose not to see things when that was easier. She was earnest and stubborn, and sometimes spectacularly wrong, and sometimes spectacularly right, and she kept going, the whole 63 years, with the quality that the era most admired and most aspired to, and most consistently failed to live up to. Duty. She called it that. Duty. The simple, intractable conviction that you were required to do the thing that needed doing, regardless of how you felt about it, regardless of how much the ring hurt on the wrong finger, regardless of how heavy the orb was. You carry what you're given, you keep going. That's Victorian. 1846. The railway mania. Exactly what James predicted. The speculation peaks, The bubble bursts. Men who made fortunes in 6 months lose everything in 3. Lord Ashworth, who had the sense to sell before the peak, emerges relatively unscathed. Men in smaller houses on smaller streets in smaller cities do not. The papers are full of it. Ruin, disaster, the inevitable consequences of irrational enthusiasm. And yet the railways that were built, the ones that were sound, the ones that weren't purely speculative, they remain. The mania passes, but the tracks stay in the ground. By 1850, England will have 5,000 miles of railway track. By 1870, 13,000. The country is, in physical terms, smaller than it was 20 years ago. Hours instead of days, and everything that means for everything. This too is Victorian. The excess and the ruin and the infrastructure that outlasts both. 1847. Peter leaves. He's been here as long as you have. Nearly arrived 6 months after you. Left his coal and grate work behind as the house modernised, learned new things. Is now going north to a position in a mill owner's house in Bradford, where the wages are higher and the air is worse, and he'll presumably make his own decisions about which of those facts matters more. He shakes your hand on the way out. Thomas, he says. Peter. He grins. He's always grinned. The particular grin of someone who has decided the best response to a world that doesn't make sense is to find it funny. I keep thinking, he says, about the morning the old king died. We were all sitting in that kitchen with our tea, remember? And you asked what it meant. You remember. I still don't know, he says. Do you? You think about it. I think, you say carefully, it meant that something new was starting, and that the only way to find out what the new thing was going to be was to stay in it long enough. Peter looks at you. Good answer, he says. He picks up his bag. Take care of yourself, Thomas. He walks out. 1849. The cholera year. It comes through in waves. It comes through Southwark first. The south side of the river always gets it first, because the water companies that supply South London draw from the Thames at a point downstream of where London's sewage enters it, which is a fact so obvious in retrospect and so unexamined in prospect that it will take another decade and another outbreak before it's acted on. 53,000 people in England, 14,000 in London alone. In the house on Grosvenor Square, the precautions are what they've always been in cholera years. Boil the water, wash the hands, keep the kitchens clean, pray. These precautions range from moderately helpful to useless, because in 1849 nobody is entirely certain how cholera travels. A physician named John Snow has a theory. He's going to prove it in 1854 with a pump on Broad Street in Soho, tracing an outbreak to a single contaminated water source, and persuading the local authority to remove the pump handle, stopping the outbreak. He'll produce a map. A beautiful, terrible map showing deaths plotted by street address, clustering around the pump with the precision of evidence. That will be a Victorian moment. The power of clear evidence to change minds. The map that made it impossible to look away. But that's 1854. In 1849, John Snow's theory is just a theory, and people in the house on Grosvenor Square are boiling their water and hoping. 1850, Albert's exhibition, the great exhibition of the works of industry of all nations. The Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, a building made almost entirely of glass and iron, 600 yards long, enclosing 3 of Hyde Park's elm trees inside it, so they don't have to be cut down, housing more than 100,000 objects from across the world and across the empire. You go on a Thursday, your afternoon off. You go in through the entrance on the north side, pay your shilling, and walk into the Crystal Palace, and then you stand still. The light. That's the first thing. The light inside the Crystal Palace is different from light anywhere else you've ever been. The glass walls and ceiling let in the June sun from every angle, and it fills the building with a quality of luminosity that doesn't have the sharp shadows of direct sunlight or the flat grey of cloud cover. It's diffused, even, present everywhere. You stand in it and feel seen by the light, by the building itself. The building is warm, warm from the sun through all that glass, and the smell of it is the smell of 10,000 different things in one enclosed space. Machine oil and sawdust, and the particular dry smell of fabrics, and the earth smell of the trees still growing in their pots inside the nave. And underneath all of that, the smell of people. Tens of thousands of people, all in their good clothes, all doing what you're doing, standing and looking. More than 6 million people will come through this building over 5 months. You are one of them, the displays. You walk for 2 hours. You don't see everything. Nobody sees everything. The place is too large. But you see the Koh-i-Noor diamond in its cage drawing a crowd of people who stand and stare at it in silence the way people stare at the sun. The steam-powered machines doing the work of 100 hands, their pistons moving with an efficiency that is somehow both impressive and alarming. The textiles from India, the porcelain from China, the silverwork from South America, the exhibits from the Empire. Everything the Empire touches, everything it takes, everything it transforms. This is also very Victorian. The display of what has been taken as evidence of what has been achieved. The Koh-i-Noor diamond belongs to India. The Victorian era is also the era that doesn't examine that sentence very carefully, but in the same building, English inventions that will change the world. Brunel's designs, new agricultural equipment that will let one man do the work of 10, a model voting machine patented and probably never used, a device for folding envelopes, the first examples of anesthesia equipment, making surgery possible without agony for the first time in human history. All of this, everything, one building. You walk back to Grosvenor Square in the late afternoon and the city around you looks different, or you look at it differently. One of those two things, 1851, the same year as the exhibition, the census. The census of 1851 finds, among other things, that for the first time in English history more people live in towns than in villages. England is, officially, an urban country. The countryside that every English person still describes as the real England, the green and pleasant land, the hedgerows, the village church, has been quietly supplanted as the place where most English people actually live. Most English people live in towns. They live in streets of terrace houses. They get their water from a pipe or a well or a vendor with a cart. They work in factories or shops or domestic service. They die of diseases that travel through water. The rural England is still there. You know, your mother still in the village near Leeds, your father at the mill, your sisters grown now, one of them married, one still at home. You write to them, less often than you should, more often than you did in the first years, when you were too tired and too new to everything to have words for it. Your mother writes back in her careful, slow handwriting, asking when you'll come home. You have no good answer. London is home now. That happened somewhere in the middle years, somewhere between the coronation and the cholera and the Crystal Palace, sometime when you weren't paying close attention. The city got inside you and started being the thing you navigated by, the streets you know, the rhythms you can feel in your body. The smell of the river and the coal smoke and the bread from the bakery on Mount Street that hits you in the face at 7 in the morning when you open the service door. Home, 1855. You are under butler. The position Mr. Graves left you. Not immediately. He was right that 22 was young. It took until you were 33, and there were years in between of the intermediate stages, and 1 year when you thought you'd go somewhere else, somewhere that offered the position faster, and you didn't, and you're not entirely sure why. Maybe because Mr. Graves's library was still there, and you were still working through it. Paradise Lost on a Sunday afternoon, sitting by the narrow window with the London light coming in at an angle. Milton's English, which is not easy but which has the quality of something worth the effort, like cutting through a skin of ice to find clean water underneath. The clarity under the difficulty. Mr. Graves retired to a cottage somewhere in Kent. He writes occasionally, the handwriting as precise and economical as the man himself. He asks about the house. He never asks about his own state of health or mood or circumstance, which you think is very like him. You're under butler, which means, among other things, that you are responsible for the training of new household members. The boy who arrives in October of 1855 is 14 years old, from Northumberland. He has a canvas bag and a letter of introduction, and a hard cheese in cloth and approximately 7 shillings. You look at him standing in the servants' hall and recognise everything. Thomas, you say, offering your hand. Thomas Hewitt, under butler. He looks at your hand like you might be playing a trick. What's your name? You ask. William, he says. William Carr. William. You shake his hand. Let me explain how the house works. He listens the way you once listened, carefully, desperately, trying to hold on to everything at once. You explain. You explain the house, the staff, the rhythms. You explain Mr. Graves's invisible rule. You're not supposed to be seen. And then you say what Mr. Graves never said to you. The rule is about the work, not about the person. The work should be invisible. The person is something else. William looks at you blankly. You remember being that blank. You'll understand it later, you say. It takes about 3 years. Get some sleep. He goes. You watch him go. The Victorian era is 18 years old. You're 33. Victoria has 7 children. Albert is redesigning Balmoral Castle. The Crimean War is ongoing. British soldiers dying in numbers that would make the numbers at Waterloo look conservative, dying of dysentery and cholera, and simple cold in the trenches before Sebastopol, while Florence Nightingale writes letters to the War Office that begin politely and become increasingly unpolite as the bureaucracy fails to respond, while the Times is printing dispatches from William Russell, the first modern war correspondent, describing conditions that make the comfortable back home feel the discomfort of knowing something must be done. Always something must be done. The Victorian era is never comfortable with itself. That's part of what makes it worth the name. A comfortable era doesn't keep looking. A comfortable era decides it's done enough and stops. The Victorian era never quite decides it's done enough. That's worth something. That's worth quite a lot. 1861. December the 14th. Albert dies. You hear it the next morning through the usual channels. The papers, the news from the street, the information moving through the city the way information always has in London. Typhoid fever. He was 42. The house goes into mourning immediately. Black. Everyone. The ribbon on the door. The subdued meals. The quiet. But this is different from the quiet of William IV's death 24 years ago. That was the death of an old man at the end of a long life. Expected, understood. This is the death of a young man. A man who was, by every account you've read, every observation you've made through 24 years of watching this era take shape, genuinely good, genuinely committed, genuinely trying, and she loved him absolutely. The country knows this. The country read the dispatches from the coronation, from the wedding, from all the years between. The country has followed the partnership of Victoria and Albert the way it has followed the novels of Dickens, instalments over years, invested in what happens next. What happens next is Victoria does not recover. She will live for 40 more years. She will rule for 40 more years. She will go to Parliament eventually. She will be involved in politics as always, as constantly. She will expand the empire. She will have opinions on everything, but she will wear black for 40 years. She will keep his rooms. She will not appear in public for years. The country will start calling her the Widow of Windsor, not with cruelty, but with the baffled affection of people watching someone grieve beyond the prescribed limits of what grief is supposed to look like. She will say, in her journals, that she is only half a person now. She said a lot of true things in those journals. The Victorian era has another 40 years still to run after 1861. But something of its character shifts here. The bright confidence of the early years, the railway mania and the Crystal Palace, and the sense that everything was possible and that progress was simply a matter of time and ingenuity, that modulates, becomes more complicated, more shadowed. The empire gets larger but also more contested. The debates about India, about Ireland, about South Africa get louder and more uncomfortable. The labour movement begins to organise. The women's movement begins, cautiously at first and then less cautiously, to ask questions that don't have easy answers. The Reform Acts of 1867 and 1884 extend the vote. To more men, but not yet to women, not yet to all, not yet, always not yet. This is what you've been watching. This is what the Victorian era is, when you see it from inside, from the corridor, from the kitchen, from the under-butler's chair. The constant, effortful, imperfect, sometimes heroic, sometimes catastrophic attempt to be better than it started. And the question, always the question, of what better means and who gets to say. You're 50 years old in 1872, head butler now. Lord Ashworth died in 1865 and the house passed to his son, a different kind of man, not unkind, but more modern in his requirements, less interested in maintaining the elaborate ceremonial structure of the full Victorian household, more interested in having things work efficiently. Fewer staff, different rhythms. The age is changing. The Victorian era's later years have a different quality from its beginning. More complicated, more contested, less certain. You're head butler, and you have the small office off the butler's pantry where Mr. Graves used to sit, and you have the books, and you have the notebook. By now you're on to your fifth, the earlier ones kept in the wooden box under the bed in your room, which is no longer an attic room but a proper room on the ground floor with a window that looks onto the area. A window looking out. You write in the notebook when the house is quiet. You write about William Carr, who has turned out to be a good footman, better than good, who has James's quality of moving through the world as if he understands more than he lets on. You write about the new Queen, the Victoria who is 53 and dresses in black and is almost never seen, but whose presence is everywhere, whose name is on everything, whose face is on the penny. You write about the railways and the exhibition and the fog and the gas lamps becoming electric lamps, some of them. The new electric arc lamps on the embankment that make gas look dim and make gas look already like the past. Everything becomes the past. That's the nature of time. But some things stay. The burned-handed man in the pub asking what the new queen would do. James on everything changes. Mr. Graves on the person not being the work. Mrs. Drummond on clever people and cages. The 4 seconds of the coronation coach, the sound. The woman from Somerset with her precise bonnet and her wet eyes. She said, "My daughters think it's ordinary." They should think it's ordinary. What ordinary things become? Victoria in her nightgown. An 18-year-old girl. Ordinary from her own point of view. Just a person, woken too early, told something she wasn't ready for and responding to it anyway. And then 63 years of it. 63 years of responding to it anyway. That's the Victorian era. Named for that. Named for the continuing daily imperfect act of a person deciding to keep going. The night after. Your room. The house quiet. London outside the window. Still always London. Still always something moving. Some cart or voice or bell. But quieter than it used to be. Quieter than the London you arrived in. When you were 15, in 1837, and everything was new and terrifying, and you had to learn every single thing. You know everything now. Or you know everything there is to know about this particular piece of it. This house, these streets, this corner of the city. The city beyond your corner you know less well. And beyond the city, England, the Empire, the world that the Victorian era has remade in 60 years of trying, that you know through newspapers and books and the second-hand accounts of people who've been to places you haven't. You've never left London again, not since you arrived. You think sometimes that you should, that there's a world outside this city that you've spent 35 years describing through its effects, the goods that arrive at the docks, the news that arrives in the papers, without ever having seen. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. The Victorian era doesn't require you to have seen everything. It just requires that you keep paying attention to what's in front of you, deciding what you're paying attention for. James said that. You put down your pen, close the notebook. The candle. There are still candles in your room even in 1872, the electric light not having made it this far into the house yet. The candle is low. The light flickers. Outside. London. You think about the girl in the nightgown. 63 years old now, somewhere in one of the royal residences, probably not sleeping. She never sleeps well, by accounts. She keeps late hours, writes in the journals, reads dispatches. The work doesn't stop just because the light goes. An era is a collection of days. Every era, when you strip it back to its core, is a collection of days lived by people who had no particular awareness of living in an era at all, who were just living, working, sleeping, carrying things, paying attention, making small decisions that became, in aggregate, the large decisions, choosing every day which contradictions to act on and which to fold into the background. The Victorian era, when someone asks you later, when history asks what was it like, was like this. It smelled of coal and horse and river and bread. It sounded like church bells and railway whistles and the accumulated roar of 2 million people proceeding. It felt like cold water in the morning and the weight of a full tray, and the particular smoothness of polished mahogany under your hands. It tasted like weak ale and hard cheese, and the occasional extravagance of a hot pie on a Tuesday afternoon. It looked like a girl in a coronation coach, 4 seconds, white and gold, composed and terrified and decided. It was not a simple time. It was not a clean time. It was not a time that knew what it was doing. But it kept going. Every day, it got up and it did the thing that needed doing, and it went to bed and it got up again. That's what it was called after. That's why it's called Victorian. Because she kept going. And so did everyone who lived in the time she named. The candle dies. Darkness. London outside still. Always still, some part of it. Some watch. Some bell. The Victorian era isn't finished yet. It has 30 more years to run. 30 more years of empire and argument and legislation and invention. Telephone, typewriter, motor car. Jack the Ripper in the autumn of 1888 in Whitechapel. 5 women murdered and the newspapers printing it in enough detail that the country can't look away. Oscar Wilde in 1895 tried and convicted and imprisoned for the crime of being what he was, the era's cruelty and the era's hypocrisy and the era's cowardice, all embodied in a single verdict. The first women's suffrage petition in Parliament in 1866, the first and not the last. Not yet. Always not yet. But heading there, always heading. You close your eyes. You think about everything that has been in 35 years of paying attention. The burned-handed man, James, Mr. Graves, Peter, William Carr, the chandler on Davies Street, the woman from Somerset, Mrs. Drummond on Clever People and Cages, 4 seconds of a coronation coach, the Crystal Palace light, all of it in the air of this room right now. History isn't somewhere else. It's not in books, not only. It's in this air, in the accumulated presence of 35 years of mornings and evenings in this house, on this square, in this city. You were there. You paid attention. That's enough. That's quite enough. The body knows when the mind is done arguing with it. Sleep comes in like the tide. Not the urgent, demanding sleep of exhaustion. The quiet, permission-giving sleep of a mind that has said everything it needed to say tonight and is now content to stop. The sounds of London fade as you sink. They don't go away. London never goes away. But they recede to the level of background, of weather, of the permanent fact of a city that has existed for 2,000 years and is not going anywhere tonight. Centuries will pass. The London of 1837 will become something unrecognisable. The horses will leave the streets. The gas will leave the lamps. The cholera will be understood and defeated. The Crystal Palace will burn down in 1936. Watched by a crowd of 100,000 who stand in the winter dark and see the glass melt. The Anchor pub in Suffolk will be rebuilt 4 times. The tanneries of Bermondsey will close. The burnt hands smell will leave the air. The Underground Railway will be dug beneath the streets. The Metropolitan Line, first opened in 1863, steam trains in tunnels, the city burrowing under itself to move its people faster. The empire will end. Not quickly, not cleanly, but it will end. The lands whose names Victoria signed her letters after, Empress of India, Queen of Australia, Queen of Canada, will one by one become themselves again. Victoria will die on January the 22nd, 1901, at 81. At Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, in the arms of her grandson, the German Kaiser, which is its own complicated historical irony, and in the presence of her son Edward, who will succeed her and name the next era after himself. She will have been queen for 63 years and 7 months. No British monarch before or since has served as long. The era she named will have changed the country completely. The railways and the Reform Acts and the public health, and the literature, and the science, and the empire, and the grief, and the glory, and the cholera, and the Crystal Palace, and all the burned-handed men, and all the women from Somerset, and all the boys from Yorkshire arriving with canvas bags and hard cheeses and 7 shillings. All of it. And still people will wake up in this city, will open their eyes in the dark, will hear the sounds of 2 million people, 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, proceeding around them. Will lie still for a moment and try to remember where they are. Will smell the air and find it change from what they grew up with. Will hear the bells, some of them, still marking the hours the way they've marked them since before any of this began. We'll decide again what to pay attention to, what to do with it, whether to keep going. That's what doesn't change. The human part, the part that wakes up in the dark and decides again to go on. That's why an era takes the name of a person, because a person is the thing that keeps going, warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, in a room in a city that never stops, in an era that's still happening somewhere in everything that the Victorian era made and broke and changed. The breath slows, the thoughts slow, the sounds of the city are very far away now, gentle, like water on stone. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it takes everyone eventually in every era, after every long day of paying attention to a world that is always more complicated than it seemed when you woke up. Let the thoughts go quiet. Let the city do what it will. You've seen enough tonight. You've seen everything. Sleep now. Rest. Good night. And yet, one more thing before the dark takes everything. You remember a Tuesday in October of 1843 when James took you east. East of the city you knew. East past the comfortable limits of Mayfair and St. James's and the polished streets that had been your world for 6 years. Past the Strand. Past the City of London with its ancient square mile of banks and insurance houses and the stock exchange. Past all of it into a different London. Whitechapel, Spitalfields, the East End. James had business there, or said he did, which was not always the same thing. He was meeting someone, a contact, someone who dealt in second-hand goods that occasionally found their way into households that wanted quality at a reduced price through channels that didn't bear too close examination. This is another thing that was Victorian. The parallel economies. The official commerce and the unofficial commerce running side by side, separated by a membrane so thin that it was essentially invisible. You walk through it in the October morning with your collar turned up against the cold that hadn't properly decided if it wanted to be autumn yet or go straight to winter. The streets narrowed east of the city. The buildings pressed together. Older buildings mostly. The half-timbered upper floors of houses that leaned slightly over the street as if trying to meet each other above the heads of the people below. The smells changed. The coal smoke was still there, always the coal smoke, but beneath it something else. The smell of crowding, of too many people in too small a space, of food cooked in shared kitchens and laundry dried in shared yards, and everything shared that in Mayfair was carefully private. The silk weavers were still here then, or what was left of them. Spitalfields had been the centre of the silk trade. The Huguenot weavers who came over from France when Louis XIV revoked their right to exist as Protestants in their own country, who settled in these streets and built the tall, narrow houses with their wide windows designed to let in maximum light for the looms. The looms were still there, some of them, but not many, because the power loom was faster and cheaper and didn't require a skilled human being at each one, and the silk trade was adapting to it the way all trades adapted to it. by ceasing to need most of the people who used to be needed. You could hear it, walking through Spitalfields, the mechanical sound, the clatter of power looms in the larger buildings, rhythmic and relentless. And the silence around it, the silence of streets that used to be noisier, the missing human sound of hand looms and the conversations around them. A woman was sitting on a step outside one of the narrow houses, a piece of work in her hands, some fine needlework too close to see from the street what it was, her head bent, her fingers moving with the automatic precision of someone doing something they've done so many times it requires no conscious attention. She was perhaps 40. She might have been 60. The quality of certain kinds of poverty-age people in ways that were difficult to read. Her hands, in the October cold, were reddened and slightly swollen at the knuckles. She didn't look up as you passed. James walked fast. He always walked fast. But you slowed, just for a moment, watching her hands. Needlework paid almost nothing, the kind that required the most skill, the finest, most precise work, paid worst of all, because it was the kind that could be done by women working at home, without machinery, without the organisation of a factory, which made it invisible to anyone counting economic output, which meant nobody had to account for it, which meant the people who bought it could pay almost anything they liked, and the people who made it had almost no alternative. The woman's hands moved. The needlework grew. That piece, when it was finished, would go somewhere. Into a shop, probably. Into a house in Mayfair, maybe, bought by someone who would admire the craftsmanship and have no knowledge of the hands that made it. James was already half a street ahead. You caught up. He met his contact, a man called Solomons, dry and precise and clearly a great deal more intelligent than anyone around him was comfortable with. In a room above a coffee house that smelled of damp and burned roasting, the business was conducted in under 10 minutes, in a language of implication and number that you didn't entirely follow, but which concluded with a handshake and a small package changing hands. On the way out you stopped. James. The weavers. The hand-loom weavers. What happens to them? James looked at you with the expression he had for questions he found simultaneously obvious and interesting. A slight widening of the eyes, a compression of the mouth. What do you think happens to them? They can't compete with the power looms. No. So they either learn to operate the power looms or they don't, James said. Most of them don't. They're skilled at one specific thing. The machine does that thing now. They're not young, he paused. The ones who are young might adapt. The ones who aren't, some of them go into the factories, do something else, at lower wages. And the others? James was quiet for a moment. The workhouse, he said. Or the street. Or they die slowly of something that's got a medical name but is really just the body giving up when there isn't enough food or warmth or reason to keep going. You walked back through Spitalfields. The woman on the step was still there. The needlework had grown by perhaps an inch. Thousands of them across the country. The hand-loom weavers and the framework knitters and the hand-throwers and the craftspeople of 100 trades that the machine had made redundant. Not in a day, not in a dramatic moment of loss, but slowly, over years, the ground shifting under their feet while they kept doing what they knew how to do, until the day the ground was gone. The Victorian era was building the world at the same time it was grinding people to nothing in the building of it. The same thing, the same moment, the Crystal Palace in 5 years, and this woman on this step, and both of them are 1843 England, and you can't resolve them into something simpler than what they are. You didn't resolve them, you carried them, that's what you did. That's what the era asked of the people who paid attention. Not resolution, but carrying. The capacity to hold the contradictions and keep walking. James, ahead of you again, not looking back. The woman's hands, moving. The cold October air. October of 1843, and you're 21 years old, and you've been in London 6 years, and the Victorian era is 6 years old, and nobody has answered the question the burned-handed man asked in the Anchor pub. What will she do? What will any of them do? The answer, it turns out, is all of it. They will do all of it. Good and terrible and magnificent and catastrophic. All of it. All at once for 63 years. That's the Victorian era. And then there was the afternoon in the spring of 1848, when the whole of Europe was burning, Paris in February, Vienna in March, Berlin, Milan, Budapest. Revolution one after another, the old orders cracking under the pressure of people who had had enough. The year that looked, for a few weeks in the spring, like the year everything changed forever. In London, Chartism. The Chartist movement had been building for 10 years. Working men organising around a simple petition, the People's Charter. 6 demands: universal male suffrage, secret ballot, payment for members of Parliament, no property qualification for MPs, annual parliaments, equal constituencies. None of these demands seem, in retrospect, particularly revolutionary. All of them seemed, in 1848, profoundly dangerous to people who had spent the last few months watching crowned heads flee their capitals. The Chartists planned a great demonstration. 100,000 people, some said. More. They would march on Westminster with a petition. 3 million signatures. They would present it to Parliament, and Parliament would have to respond. Lord Ashworth, at dinner, the door not quite closed you in the corridor, on the 6th of April, 1848. They'll disperse. They always disperse. They have no rifles. He said it flatly, not with cruelty. With the particular confidence of someone who has never had to reconsider whether the existing order of things is the only possible order of things. On the 10th of April, the demonstration happened. It did not happen quite as planned. The numbers were less than announced. The day was wet. The police and the military had been mobilised. Tens of thousands of special constables sworn in, including, it was reported, a large number of clerks and shopkeepers, and even some servants who had been encouraged by their employers to do their bit for order. The march happened. The petition was delivered. Parliament declined to consider it. The revolution that swept Europe that year did not come to England. People said this was because England was different, more sensible, more stable, better governed. Some people, writing about it later, much later, in history books that hadn't been written yet, would say it was because England had already done enough reform through the Reform Act of 1832 and the various pieces of factory legislation and poor law reform to take the pressure off the most extreme demands. That the Victorian era's imperfect, grinding, argumentative reform process had done just enough to prevent explosion. Others said it was because the police and the military were better organised. Both things were probably true. You, in the corridor, hearing Lord Ashworth's flat confidence. They have no rifles. You thought about the burned-handed man, about whether he was among the 100,000 who marched or fewer, about whether his signature was on the petition, about whether his daughters had shoes. You thought about what James said that first morning, about the difference between what an era says it is and what it actually is. You thought about being invisible in a corridor and carrying thoughts that had nowhere to go. And then the evening bell rang and you carried the port into the dining room, and you were invisible and the port was excellent. And Lord Ashworth talked about the railways, which were his more comfortable topic. The Chartist petition failed. But 20 years later, the Reform Act of 1867 gave the vote to working men in urban areas, and in 1884 the Reform Act extended it to rural workers. Not what the Chartists asked for, not all of it, not yet, but most of it. Eventually, imperfectly, in the way that the Victorian era gave everything, too slowly, too incompletely, too self-congratulatory about it, but it gave. 3 years after the Chartist March, in 1851, the Crystal Palace, Albert's vision of what industry could be when properly organised and celebrated, the exhibition of what the era had made, and somewhere in Bermondsey, the burned-handed man standing in his pit, and you in your corridor. And Victoria in her palace, writing in her journal about everything she couldn't say out loud. All of us contained in the same 6 letters. Victorian. An era named for the woman at the top of it, who was also, in her way, contained. Who lived in palaces and still understood from the inside what it meant to have your door controlled by someone else. She wrote to Melbourne in the early years, "I am afraid of men, not physically afraid, politically afraid." The men around her, the ministers, the courtiers, the advisers, the Conroys and the Wellingtons and the Peels, they all had opinions about what she should do that were really opinions about what would be convenient for them. And she had to navigate all of it while appearing to defer while actually deciding. She was very good at appearing to defer while actually deciding. The Victorian era learned that from her, or the Victorian era was like her, or they developed it in parallel, the nation and its queen, both of them learning to move through the world with one face visible and another face private, the private one doing the real work. This is not a simple thing to say about any person or any era. It's not entirely a criticism, it's just accurate. The complexity of governing, of existing, of surviving in a world that has strong ideas about what you should be doing and limited interest in your own ideas about it. You carry your tray, you write in your notebook, you pay attention, you are the era, not the famous part, not the Crystal Palace or the coronation coach or the parliamentary debates or the railways, but the era nonetheless. The part that makes everything else possible by existing quietly and persistently in the corridors. The Victorian era's servants, its invisible half, its necessary foundation, without which the visible edifice collapses immediately. You, all the thousands of you across 63 years in every house and shop and factory and farm and office in the country, doing the work that doesn't get recorded in the official accounts because it's too ordinary and too constant to seem like history. It is history. Every tray, every floor laid in the cold morning dark, every letter carried, every meal served, every year of hands roughened by work done for someone else's comfort. All of it, history, the Victorian era, named for the woman who was woken at 6 in the morning and told she was queen. Named in a way for everyone who was woken before 6 and had things to carry, before the house was awake. Name for keeping going. Name for getting up tomorrow and doing it again. The sounds of London are very far away now. The candle is long dead. The room is dark and warm from your own warmth in it. Tomorrow will come. The bells will ring at 5:30. The coal will need laying. The floor will need sweeping. The house will need to be invisible worked into a state of visible perfection before Lord Ashworth's new son descends for his breakfast. That's tomorrow. Tonight, only this. The warm and the dark and the 63 years of an era settling around you like a blanket. Warm enough, safe enough, done enough. Let sleep come the way it came for Victoria, eventually, after the dispatches were read and the journals written and the long work of being a person in history was set aside for the night. Let it come the way it came for the burned-handed man, and for James, and for the woman from Somerset, and for the woman on the step in Spitalfields, with her needlework growing by an inch. Let it come the way it comes for everyone who has carried something heavy all day and has finally set it down. You've set it down. It's enough. Let the Victorian era go on without you for the night. It will manage. It always manages. It's been managing for 63 years without your help in the dark. Close your eyes. The last sound you hear is a church bell, somewhere south of the river, marking an hour that belongs to nobody and everybody, and then only the dark and the rest, and the enormous, patient, breathing quiet of a city that will still be there when you wake up. It always is. Good night.